Got my nitro gloves on because today I want to talk to you about resin 3D printing. Now, I've already given the comparisons of FDM and resin printing, so you can check that out. Maybe they'll be here or there'll be a link in the description. So I'm not going to talk about how it compares to FDM printing, except for one thing. If you're looking to print terrain, then go check out my video on FDM printing. If you're wanting to print miniatures, then resin printing is where it's at. But this video comes with a lot more caveats and warnings because resin printing can be rather toxic. So let's come back here first off and talk about my biggest recommendation of which printer you're gonna want if you're gonna do resin printing. And that, of course, is the Frozen Sonic Mighty 8K. I'll put links in the description. And yes, it's an affiliate link, but I bought this before I got the affiliate link. So I really do love this. I've used the Anycubic Photon Mono X, and that's great. It's a good beginner printer, so I'll have a link down there as well. I've also used a $3,000 printer from Formlabs, which did a good job, but was a pain to use because everything's proprietary, and their resin is 3 to 5 times more expensive, and you can only use their resin. So you don't really need to think about that. We're not even gonna talk about that besides me just mentioning it right there. If you just wanna go to one of the Frozen products, they have a few things. They got the minis as well, so if you wanna save some money and have a smaller printer, then you can go for that as well. One thing I want to point out, this is an 8K. Now you probably know what 8K means because you're familiar with 4K for your TV. It's the resolution. So the resolution of the screen that's shooting up the UV light, which we'll talk about in a second, is 8K. Now, if you have a 4K printer and the build plate is half as big, it's the same resolution. You have to understand that. If it's half as big and it's 4K versus twice as big at 8K, you're looking at the same resolution. So just because something says 8K or 4K or 12K, you have to remember that it's the size of the build plate plus that makes a difference. But I can highly recommend these. But if you wanted to start out with something cheaper, then get the Anycubic because that'll work just fine for what you need. You just won't be able to get quite as good detail as what you might see on this video. So before we go any further, I have to talk about safety. Unlike FDM printing, you have to take resin printing very seriously. The resin itself is incredibly toxic until it is cured. I'm not gonna go into the scientific stuff, but let's just say that there's like monomers and stuff that turns into polymers and stuff. It's very sophisticated engineering stuff like stereolithography and whatever, who cares? It's just basically you have a liquid resin, which in that state is liquid. You hit it with UV light, ultraviolet light, which means sunlight will do this too, so keep it out of the sunlight. This is why you'll see no windows in here. And that actually then turns into a polymer, which means it hardens. And that's all it does. It has a build plate. So we come over here, you can see something. I'm gonna take this off just for a moment. We're not wearing our respirators right now, but it shouldn't be too bad just for a moment. So if we come in nice and close, nice and down so we can see what's going on underneath, we've got our build plate. And what it's doing is it lowers down into the resin until it gets all the way down, and then it blasts it with some light in a specific pattern for a couple of seconds, enough to harden the resin, and then it lifts, so it disconnects that resin from the film that is at the bottom, and then it lowers back down. So if you come down here just in time, we'll see on this little black screen, it'll turn white for a second and show you what it blasts up. So that's the layer that it did just right there. And now it's gonna pull back up, and it's going to then go back down and repeat that over and over and over again. So just like FDM printers, it's printing layer by layer, except in this case it's upside down, and it gets the entire layer done in one shot rather than having to move back and forth. So safety-wise, because of the toxicity of the fumes, and especially the alcohol, which you're going to be washing this with afterwards, unless you're using a water-soluble one, but even then, because of the resin fumes, you're gonna need some ventilation. Now, we went and kind of spent a lot of money on a big one because we've got a lot of stuff going on right here. You don't necessarily have to go this far. I've seen a lot of different setups. First off, you can put it in your garage near a window and then have like a little fan going to blow it out the window. That could work, but you gotta be careful because you will start to notice irritation in your chest right here from smelling the resin and the IPA, the alcohol, and that's not something that you want. I've experienced that and it's not good. I've been careless with it, and you can really feel it burning in your lungs, and that is not something you want. And you might think, well, I've touched resin and nothing's happened. But what happens is eventually you can spontaneously develop an allergy to it, and then every time you touch it after that, you'll break out in hives and rashes, and it's just not pleasant whatsoever. Which is why I recommend nitro gloves, and on top of that, a respirator. especially when you're working with the alcohol. So what I did there when I opened that was just for a few seconds. Even then, I would always use one of these because it'll make all the difference in the world. And if you're gonna be 3D printing for a long time, you're gonna have those small buildups that's gonna cause a lot of health problems. So one of the things that I learned, one of the tricks that I wanna share with you here is how to wash your 3D prints after they come out. Now when they first come out, they're gonna be covered in a layer of resin. Now you can leave them to kind of drip dry, but they're still gonna have that layer on top of that. And you do not want that to hit the sunlight or any post-curing, because it'll put an extra layer that'll ruin a lot of your details. So most resin you're going to be rinsing in alcohol, 99% alcohol, unless you buy a water-soluble resin. Now I haven't experimented with water-soluble resins in the frozen yet because the resin that they sell works so well, but I will do that in the future so that we can experiment with just how far we can push these things and get the best results and save ourselves a lot of money not having to buy more alcohol and also all the smells that come with it. So one person showed me that you can save a lot of money on your alcohol by having a triple wash station. So come on a little closer. We're gonna take a look at what a triple wash station is. Well, you can probably guess by its name that there's 3 wash stations. The first one is the dirtiest. Now it doesn't start off that way, of course. It's just 3 things of alcohol. I'm gonna quickly close that back up though, because I don't want to smell it. The second one is less dirty. As you can see, I'm not sure if you'll be able to tell that that's less dirty, but it is. And then the third one, this one we just newly cleaned, is the least dirty. So the idea is that when it first comes out of the 3D printer, you dunk it in here. You don't have to leave it in there for very long. You use your gloves, you can just dunk it in and swirl it around. This is all before you do any curing, by the way, and we'll talk about that in a second. You dunk it around, you lift it up and let all that rush off. And that's gonna get all the gloopy resin out. And then you can put it in here, maybe leave it for a minute or two, and then lift it up and move it around just to get some more resin off. And then lastly, you put it in your final batch, which honestly by that point is 90% clean, 95% clean. This is just to get the last little bits, because you want to get rid of the resin for 2 reasons. One, because the resin's toxic, but you're gonna do some post-curing to fix that. The second reason is because if you have resin on it when you go to post-cure, then it's going to fill in those little details as it hardens, and you're not gonna get as nice a quality of a miniature. Another thing I recommend that you buy for sure is a wash and cure station. So this is an Anycubic wash and cure station. They're relatively inexpensive, and it serves a dual purpose, as you can probably tell by the title, that those wash basins you saw the IPA in earlier in the video, you can put in here and it'll swirl it around. So that's really good for your 3rd station and their triple wash. But it also has a second function, which is the curing. So come on in and let's take a look. We've got some miniatures here. This is a Gorkog miniature from the Ravish Star line that's going to be coming out. And so this one has been printed. It's pretty safe to touch, but there's the final layer on the outside of a miniature isn't always 100% cured. And if you're going to be touching a lot of them, then maybe over time that's not a good idea to have that stuff touching your hands. So we put it in here. This is specifically designed to block UV light because you don't want to be looking at UV light. And I'm just going to stick it to a minute, and we're going to run the cure. And what that'll do is that'll turn it and shines UV light, and there's a mirror on the bottom, so it tries to get the bottom as well. And it just finishes curing the outside. Now you can over cure miniatures because the more you cure it, the more brittle they become. I'm going to be making another video where I'm going to do some experiments with just how much you have to do to over cure them. But remember this, sunlight has a lot of UV light in it. So if you leave them on your windowsill, you can skip needing to have a cure station. But if you leave them there for a long time, it's possible that they'll get really, really brittle. Depends on the miniature and how sensitive the parts are. If you have really small parts like on a sword or a shoulder pad that ends in a spike, those are going to be more sensitive to over curing than if you have a more blocky miniature that isn't as likely to break. So curing for a minute or 2 is usually all you need, especially if you've done a good job washing it. If you pick up the miniature afterwards and it's a little tacky, that means you probably didn't wash it well enough. And so you should do that, and then you should cure it one more time. And another important part of what you're going to use is the slicing software. Now, unlike FDM printing, if you watch that video, I really do care what slicing software you use. There's a lot of good ones out there, but the problem is you're going to be dealing more with supporting models. And what that means is that the model needs these extra lines coming up in order to stop it from falling off of the plate, and also to support different parts that are just sticking out in odd angles. And you're going to be doing that a lot more often. Now you can circumnavigate that by buying STLs from people who pre-support. but sometimes you just want one that's just awesome, but it's not pre-supported. So if we come on in, the software that I recommend is CheetahBox, but specifically CheetahBox Pro. I don't know why, but their basic doesn't support as well as their pro. You might think, well, it's because it's pro. It's like, but it's, you know, you think that the algorithm would be the same. But if you do auto supports with basic, they'll fail half the time, and you have to learn how to properly support. But if you buy CheetahBox Pro, then you, like me, can be lazy and never have to worry about properly supporting your models, because it does it automatically. And I've been doing this for months now, and none of them have failed because of supports. They may have failed for other reasons. So if we look right here, you can see I have CheetahBox Pro open, and I'm going to bring in a file for the MRI for Ravish Star. So we got this. It'll auto repair, which just means that some of the polygons weren't quite aligned to where they're supposed to be, and it'll detect that and then automatically repair them. These models weren't designed for 3D printing. These were designed for production at a factory. And so, as you'll see, I'm dealing with a model right here that does not come supported, nor does it come optimized for printer. So now it just got optimized. I'm not going to go through the specific details of how to use the software. We can always do that later. I just want to show you the process. The next thing we want to do is we want to rotate it. So rotating it is a bit of an art. And like I said, we don't want to go into too much detail right here about how to properly support stuff. I just want to give you the basics. What you're looking for is the direction, the flow of the resin going up, and how many supports you're going to need. So for example, when this one's going to provide a challenge because, like I said, it wasn't designed for 3D printing. So we got things going all over the place. We've got a gun pointing this way, while the axe points this way, while we have the cloak pointing this way. But basically, whichever side is facing the plate is going to get the supports. And the supports sometimes can leave little divots. Even the best supports will do that. And so what we want to do is we want to minimize that as much as possible. So there's a few ways to do that. First off, you just make sure that whatever side is facing the build plate you don't really care about, like the bottom of a base, for example. But you also are looking for things like, if this is pointed straight up, it won't need as many supports. So I'm just going to stick it like this for now. This is not the optimal way to do it. It does have an auto orientation, but I don't find that that works really well. And we'll just go to support. And I like to use light supports wherever possible. So I usually use light supports unless the model is going to be really chunky, and this is not a chunky model. So light right here. And you can adhere only to the platform or all. And what that means is if you do platform, it'll only connect the platform to certain parts, whereas all, it'll connect the platform to certain parts, but it'll also put supports on the inside of the model. So that's actually what you want. So we're gonna hit all, and you'll see that CheetahBox Pro will work relatively quickly for one model, and it will add the supports. And we'll take a look at what those look like. So you can see all of these supports on there. They're the gray colors in there, and you can see that we have supports going from one part to the next so that everything works out well. Now, this is over supported because I hit auto supports. So if you really learn how to support properly, you can save yourself some resin, but I just find it's not worth all of the extra effort. You'll also see that we have a support going all the way up to the axe, whereas if I had oriented that, then it would need less supports. But it does a pretty good job on the cloak of not filling it up too much, so it won't leave divots in really important spots. It's trying to find spots that are going to be a little more hidden, that you're not going to see those divots in. Once we have that, we just slice it. Of course, we have all the parameters set, and we'll have to do another video about how to properly dial in your printer, because that's an important thing as well. But once you slice it, you take that file and you send it to your printer. The Sonics can actually have it transmitted over your network. Others will need an SD card for you to take it over there, and then you print it. And that's really all there is to it. If you feel like I'm all over the place, it's because I am. I'm just trying to show you a bunch of stuff, and you can ask questions in the comments, and I'll try to answer this best I can. And maybe we'll have a more congruent tutorial later on. So I want to talk, the last thing is about all the different stuff that you're going to want to have when you have a Resin 3D printer. Now thankfully, when you buy printers, they come with a lot of things that you need, such as a metal scraper for taking things off of the build plate. Don't worry too much about scratching the build plate. In fact, they also come with sandpaper, because it's not a bad idea to sand the build plate and then wash it really well to get a little more texture on it. They also come with plastic scrapers. Now these are incredibly important, because if you're ever going to clean the vat, which is the thing at the bottom, you do not use this one. You use this one, because that sheet that is down there, if you do scratch that up, you're going to have to buy a new one. And they're not too expensive, but they're a big pain to change out. And then you'll get other things that you'll want to buy. They do come with clippers, of course, but I also like to buy a pair of tweezers, because then when you're removing supports, you can see all the supports on these, and some of them are being a little finicky, you can put the tweezers in there. And then I'm not actually going to remove the supports, because that's not how I would do it. And I'll show you in just a second how I would remove those supports, because I think that's an important part to a beginner understanding how to do resin 3D printing. If we go to our shelves over here, you can see all sorts of other stuff that we have. And I've already mentioned the masks, and I've mentioned the nitrile gloves. Nitrile, not latex. Latex, the resin will eat right through it. Of course, we have our resin. Now, what resin do you buy? Well, if you're using the frozen Sonic Mighty 8Ks, well, you can buy their proprietary resin, which works just fine. I haven't tested them out with other resin, but there are lots of other types of resins out there, especially ones that are water soluble. So you can just have to, whatever you use, you're gonna have to change the settings on your printer to match that. But they usually come with, like the Cheeto Box Pro comes with all of them pre-built in. So you just have to select the resin that you're using, and it's usually pretty good. Although in a separate video, I'll show you how to dial on your printer properly. You're gonna need lots of paper towels. I recommend, let's see, oh yes, I recommend a duster or air in a can or whatever you call this. Because when you're taking all the supports off your miniature, sometimes you'll get a couple supports that'll hang on the inside, and you just spray it and that pops them right out. So that always works. You're gonna need lots of alcohol, and that's why you want your triple wash station, because it saves you a lot of alcohol. And in a separate video, perhaps I'll show you how to recycle the alcohol once it gets to this part. Because essentially what happens with the triple wash is once this gets too dirty, like what happened today, is we'll take the third one, we're gonna move it and get and recycle it, which is basically put it out in the sun for a few days, then siphon off the good alcohol and throw the rest away. And then the one that's in the center becomes a third one. And then with a clean one of these, or if you just have three of the same things, you move this to be the second one, and then you have fresh alcohol for the first one. This will save you a lot of money in IPA, because this is not cheap. We're probably talking about a couple $100 of alcohol to fill up all of these wash stations. But once you've had that investment, you don't have to spend as much to keep it going. Maybe another reason to try out the water soluble stuff, but like I said, I haven't tested that in these printers, so I can't tell you just how good they are quite yet. Let's see, oh yes. I also recommend getting some Tupperware containers, and I'll show you why in just a second, because this is where we're going to actually work on removing the supports. And also, you don't need this. I use a kettle because the sink that is right outside of our room, it takes about 20 minutes to get hot water to it. So I use a kettle to make some nice warm water anyways for removing supports, which I'm gonna show you to do right now. There's more than one way to do this, but essentially, you do not want to cure your miniature before you remove the supports. So let's grab something in here. I got one right here. I've already started to do this one, but it doesn't matter, it'll still work for what we want. So this is an uncured miniature. I would recommend gloves, but you could handle it with your bare hands at this point because it's nice and clean if you did the triple wash. So essentially what we want to do is get these supports off, but if I just start pulling them off, it might work, but they're also going to leave little divots. So what I've done is I've heated up some water, basically as hot as you can stand it, because this resin that we're using becomes very pliable under heat. So I've seen people use heat guns as well, but I like the more general approach to this. So come on in close and you'll see what happens. So I'm just gonna drop that in there, and it doesn't get all the way into the model. So we're just gonna move it around. And what should happen, first off, I can feel how flexible this resin is becoming. Now you gotta be careful with this, because if you have any small parts on your model, then they'll also become quite pliable and flexible. But if everything works well, then the supports should start to just peel off. Now for some models, you can just wrench the whole thing off and it's all good, but I'm worried about this banner, so I'm gonna take my time a bit more. I'm gonna start down here. See how that just very satisfying sound there as it comes around. And there is a big chunk of our supports, which we'll put aside for a second. I'm just going to reach around here and grab some tweezers. I'm going to drop that back down there for a second just to warm everything back up. Then, yeah, you can see how flexible that banner is because it's all warm. So we got to be careful with it. So we're just going to use tweezers. I'm just going to drop those back in the water for now. You can just throw those in the garbage because they are cured enough that they're not toxic anymore. And you just slowly and carefully remove all the supports. And you're going to get ones inside of the miniature as well sometimes. And so that's where the tweezers are really good. So if everything is nice and warm, they should just peel off. And you just got to be careful around some of the smaller ones. You also don't want to scrape across the model and cause any problems. So that's mostly done. I can see I've missed a couple already, and we'll go over it again. The last thing I'd like to do is come on over here, and I'll take my air can, and so you can see little bits of resin coming out of there, and also just spray some of the water out. If you ever play the Legos and got water in it, then you know why you want to do this, because that water will stay in there and it'll take a very long time. Now I haven't got all of the supports off, but as you come closer, you can just see how detailed that model is able to be, and just how nice it looks with those supports. And then I would take this, and after cleaning up those little nubs and things from the supports, I would put it to cure for about a minute, just so we can make sure that everything is nice and strong. But you can see, yeah, just how flexible the resin is when it's warm. So you got to be careful with that. Well, that is the conclusion of our resin 3D printing, how to get started. I was all over the place, but hopefully amongst all of that, there's some useful information. If you have more questions, of course, I'd love to hear them. Leave a comment in the description below, and we'll definitely be talking more about 3D printing for miniatures and terrain. This is Matthew from the Mini Wargaming Forge. Happy 3D printing. I'll get that one day.